Good afternoon, everyone. It appears we do not have sound. So let me ask Hindi. Can you hear me loud and clear?
I can hear you.
All right, how many fingers am I holding up?
I think that's a side issue.
So, senses are senses. So, I'm William Daroff from Jewish Federation of North America, and I'm a Washingtonian, so on behalf of Washington, D.C., welcome to the nation's capital. We have an interesting panel that we are starting right now, and we'll be duplicating this, which we didn't actually talk about this. We'll be doing this in the second set as well, so feel free to come to both, and you can tell us which was better. And also, if we do a good job, please tell your colleagues who are in other sessions about how great this session is. We are focused on exploring anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campus. Over the past 15 years, there has been an increase in BDS activity on college campuses. In the past, this has mainly manifested itself in the form of student government, divestment resolutions, an occasional Sabra Hummus boycott, or an interruption of an Israeli speaker. However, in the past few years, we've been seeing a much more concerning climate on campus, with BDS activity having morphed into anti-Semitism, often parading as anti-Zionism, or worse cases that are straight up anti-Semitism. According to our colleagues at the Anti-Defamation League, there has been a doubling of anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses in the last year, 204 in 2017 compared to 108 in 2016. So let me say that again, 204 incidents on college campuses of anti-Semitism in 2017 versus 108 that were reported in 2016. Campus anti-Semitism has been coming from the alt-right and neo-Nazi groups. It has also been coming from left-leaning anti-Israel groups. What these increases in incidents have shown is that while currently the FBI says that Jews are the largest target of campus hate crimes, there's little action from universities. We have found generally that administrators, faculty, and campus staff need guidance in how to address these issues of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We at the Israel Action Network, the effort of the Jewish Federations of North America in partnership with the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and to combat the delegitimization of Israel, in tandem with our Federation partners, have increasingly seen our role as to assist and quarterback the response in the most egregious campus incidents that are not traditional BDS. The campus climate issues have been complicated, and federations and JCRCs have become increasingly involved in helping during these difficult situations. This afternoon, we're going to hear from colleagues both from within our system, as well as our partners at the Brandeis Center, to speak about the challenges we face on campus, how our students and our Hillels are dealing with them, what the Federation and JCRC role is, what the legal resources are that are available as well. So I will introduce our panel, and then we will hear from them. I'm proud to say that the panel is, with the exception of me, an all-female panel, and I think does fit. It's actually a serious issue where many of us who are invited to panels often find ourselves as the only, being an all-male panel. And so I applaud Stephanie Hausner from the Israel Action Network and the JCPA who put this together to try to balance out that unfortunate imbalance that is usually out there. So with that, we will first hear from Emily Briskman. Emily is the Assistant Vice President and Executive Director of the Jewish United Fund Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago's Israel Education Center, the IEC. Her responsibilities include oversight of programs for high school and college students, tackling the delegitimization of Israel on college campuses, relationship management with faculty and administrators, and on-campus national Israel organizations, just to name a few. Emily is a trusted and great colleague who works closely with us on the IAN team. And she will speak for 5 to 7 minutes or so, just giving a background on the state of campus today. And then I will introduce the next speaker when Emily's done. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you, William. It's an honor to be here and an honor to sit with these women and William on this panel today, who are good friends and incredible thought partners on all of these issues. I have been working in Hillel with the Federation, et cetera, in some multiple capacities, but always on student issues for the last 15 years. I have been through every single one of William's examples of protests and boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns, referenda, resolutions, students dealing with anti-Semitism, both sort of personal issues and and institutional issues. So I'm actually really honored to be here because this is something really close to my heart, something I think about consistently all the time. You know, every year something like this happens, and some conference happens, and Jewish professionals get together, and we say this is a unique moment in history, right? And it always is. I think this one in particular is certainly no exception. We're living in what is a very politically divisive time, but when it comes to anti-Semitism, I really feel like we're at a new frontier. When I started with Hillel and Federation, 15 years ago, I really would have never put together anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I wanted there to be a distinction, and I wanted to talk about it in that way, and I just don't think we can do that anymore. It's impossible. Those things are inherently linked in the way Israel and Judaism is being talked about on campus today. Unfortunately, as Americans, we really thought it was behind us, right? It was in the rearview mirror. We didn't think it would be, we thought we were accepted. We had built the hospitals that we had to build because the Jewish doctors couldn't work in those hospitals. We put our names on the sides of academic buildings. We wanted to be accepted and integrated, and then we were. And then the shift happened. We were too integrated. We were too accepted. We became too much a part of American society and too much of the man, right? Ask any non-Jewish college student today, and I have tried this, how many Jews there are in the world, and the answer is anywhere between 100 million and 1 billion.
Wow.
Every time. Every time. If only. We wish. And they are shocked. I've taken, at this point, thousands now of non-Jewish students to Israel on travel programs to learn and do deep dives on the conflict, on Israel, on religion, etc. And they are shocked every time to learn how few Jews there are in the world and the influence that Jews have had in the Middle East, in America, etc. So then we move to the college campus, right? And at this moment in history, identity is currency. And there's a political litmus test to join any movement on campus, always. The problem is the Jews see themselves as a minority on one side, and the rest of campus is saying that they're white and privileged and belong in this other box over here. So what's the result? We have thousands of Jewish college students who are on one hand apologizing for being Jewish and feeling deeply guilty for their privilege, and at the same time they're being intensely harassed online. They're seeing swastika after swastika painted and removed from the sides of their campus buildings. Not to mention, try being a Jewish student of color on campus today. But because we as a society can't hold multiple truths at the same time, they're asked to pick between identities that are inherent to them, right? But it's okay, because they're talking about Israel. So don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Could you imagine being that student today? It's intensely soul-crushing for them. But it's not just at the student level, right? Anti-Semitism, both blatant and under the guise of anti-Zionism, is normalized at every level of the university. Faculty use Israel as the example of colonialism and oppression and the evil in this world. Casual anti-Semitism goes unchecked across campus. I've spoken with dozens of administrators who, on the one hand, are either sympathetic to those who use the examples of Zionism and Israel as the evil in the world, to those who honestly throw up their hands, look at me and say, I don't know what to do about it because it's Israel. I just don't know what to do. And they're confused and they want to help, they just don't know how. And they're afraid of saying, we want to help you, but we don't know what to do because their colleagues who are sitting next to them may be politically in a different place from them. We saw it at Michigan, right? We all know the example of Michigan withholding recommendations for study abroad programs. Seemingly that was a grassroots initiative. Absolutely not. It was a national initiative that came with a handbook. These are things that are 1,000% affecting our students today, but they're not just grassroots initiatives. These are things that are happening nationally with coordination that we have to recognize are not just students, trying to fight oppression in this world. It's a real national issue. So Chicago, we're very lucky, right? And I recognize that. We have a model that puts us at every level of sort of university life, from the student level My little department has hundreds of interns on campus, up to relationships with the university. We really work at leveraging every relationship we could possibly have. Our currency as CRC professionals, for me, campus professionals, it's relationships. Whatever relationship you have, you need to be able to activate, which means we map every campus with trustees, who crosses between the board of directors to the trustees level, what relationships at the donor level do we have that we can activate for letter writing or other issues, and students who are really trying to figure out this issue. I just left a conference last night, flew overnight, with 350 college students, 150 Hillel professionals, talking about this very same issue. These speeches, these questions were happening. They're asking exactly the same questions that this panel is about to talk about. We're all trying to figure it out together, and I think we'll get there.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily. Next up, my colleague Geri Palast is the Executive Director of the Israel Action Network. She has extensive experience, and do we need more chairs in the back? Are we, somebody's working on it, okay. For those of you watching the live stream, we are standing room only. Here in this packed room. Very good. So in the back, I apologize. So Geri Palast, as I said, is the Executive Director of the Israel Action Network. She has extensive experience organizing and leading national grassroots and legislative issue campaigns. She has founded and run 4 NGOs, including the Israel Action Network. She served as the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs during the Clinton administration, as well as Political and Legislative Director for the Service Employees International Union. Geri is going to talk to us about ways that college administrations are addressing campus climate issues, as well as sort of moving us into the whole anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism discussion. Geri.
So again, thank you, William, thank you, Emily, thank you, Alyza, and everybody here. I know we are all struggling with these same issues. So building off what we've heard already, it's very clear that the commitment by university and college administrators to what people are now calling inclusive excellence, and there's a lot of jargon in this universe, there must be a means to deal with campus climate. And the effort specifically needs to include how does it affect Jewish students, issues of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism. And that's kind of, again, the lingo, if you will, of the discourse. So we're supposed to have free speech with respect to criticism of Israeli policies. That's acceptable, kosher, if you will. But the question is, if you bring in anti-Semitic tropes into the debate about anti-Zionism, then you're crossing the line. These are incredibly gray and complex issues, and the venues in which people are discussing it are public universities, private universities, small liberal arts colleges. The public universities feel that they have more at risk because they represent public institutions. Private universities are a little bit freer to regulate these things because they're not necessarily, at risk because they're not a public institution. And so there is no cookie cutter, even though we try to put forward certain things. There are many, and Alyza is a litigator herself, but there are many First Amendment lawyers, if you will, who are very interested. All of you may know Mark Yudof, who used to be Chancellor of the University of California, who is one of our colleagues at the Academic Engagement Network. And even the most, shall we say, the most knowledgeable First Amendment scholars have trouble navigating these waters. So I just want to say that at the outset. Also compounding these issues, and it touches on something that Emily touched on, is that given the way history has worked, when Jews originally organized on campus, when they created the Hillel, when we created the Hillels and everything else, these institutions were seen as private and separate from universities. In the movements for diversity and inclusion, whether it's the Black students or the Latino students or whatever groups of students there are, the ethnic students, are part of a university complex and come easily in most portfolios on campus under the deans of students, the deans of inclusion and diversity. They're all called different things at universities. The Jewish students are not. They do not sit at that table. And so there's a segregation to begin with, and it underscores the white privilege issue because people see these large Hillel buildings on campus and they see that as other. So we start out from that place. In the 2014-2015 academic year, there was, and many of you are aware of this, there were a lot of allegations made to the university about the rise of anti-Semitism, whether it were swastikas on campus or Jewish students being excluded from this or that event, or again, these anti-Zionist tropes brought into the BDS resolution issues at the student government level. And there was a real effort at the outset, and this just shows you how the landscape has changed. At that point, I would say the more, to use political terminology, the more center-right and right-wing view within the Jewish community was, we got to get the universities to adopt the definition of anti-Semitism that the State Department holds and codify that in some way so that it becomes a measurable. I think the feeling of the Jewish communal world at that point, and that included the IAN and the ADL and the AJC and Hillel and AEN and that group of people, which I would call the center, said, no, we don't want to get into codifying anti-Semitism and using it as a hammer. Rather, we want to come at this from, let's explicitly have universities include anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism as part of a list of isms when we talk about racism and bigotry. And let's lift up training on education for everybody, like from administrators to faculty to student government leaders on these issues, so that as these issues arise, people have a sensitivity to it. So there was a year-long process at the University of California, and this affected all the campuses statewide. We were very active in coordinating that effort, and we came up with, what were called the Principles Against Intolerance, which articulated some of the things that I talked about and made them actionable. Okay, and we could go into greater depth on that, but it really set a standard. The next problem we encountered, though, is this was a university system-wide accomplishment, and everybody felt very good about it, but then the question is, who's going to implement it at the university level? And the fact is, there was very little implementation. And my colleague, Lisa Armoni, was very involved at Irvine, because Irvine was the one UC campus that stepped forward and actually created an actionable plan. And again, the same group of organizations were at the table. Lisa was one of the leaders at the local level, and there was national input. And you had a dean of diversity and inclusion, Doug Haynes, an African-American man who was really very interested in trying to solve these problems on campus. And so he created an implementation on the ground. Okay, my colleague Brian is telling you this. So we tried to extract that model, let's just say at Rutgers University, another broad statewide university, we tried to bring that into the mix. The administration absolutely refused. It didn't matter that we brought in donors and trustees, they weren't doing it that way, so we had to organize from the ground up. And what's happened is we've engaged Jewish faculty, Hillel, the students, and we've gotten buy-in from organizing the groups underneath and making demands so that we actually have an event for those of you who are in New Jersey coming up in March that will raise these issues at a training and sensitivity level. There are actions, and Alyza will probably get into this, the new administration really is, there's an Anti-Semitism Awareness Act on the Hill, there is an effort to get the State Department definition codified and have it applied as a tool in looking at whether there are violations of Title VI, which is part of the Civil Rights Act with respect to this. These issues have been joined at Rutgers, and we can talk about that litigation. And lastly, I just want to say other issues besides the references and recommendations at Michigan and AEN and ADL have proposed code language now for this. We've also, another big issue is whether or not travel and study abroad in Israel is going to be precluded by universities. There was a vote by some subset of the faculty at Pitzer College and the administration, thank heaven, for the organizing by the LA Federation, and trustees and donors that are in our community have gotten a statement by the administration that this is counter to academic freedom and the mission of the university.
Great.
When is the Rutgers event?
March 31st.
Thank you very much, Geri. Next up, last but not least, is Alyza Lewin. Alyza is the president and general counsel of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under the Law. She's also a co-founder and partner in Lewin & Lewin law firm, where she has specialized in litigation, mediation, and government relations, has a very formidable Supreme Court practice, and is someone who has brought a lot of heft to looking at the legal issues involved here, and will look at the issues around the lens through which we look at these discriminatory activities on campus, and the legal tools that will be available to us to counter that discrimination. Alyza.
Thank you, William, and thank you for including me on this panel. I'm actually going to stand up so I can see the people down in the back of the room. As I said, I'm Alyza Lewin. The Brandeis Center, the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, you should know, is not affiliated with Brandeis University. It is a separate nonprofit that was set up in 2011 by Ken Marcus to use legal tools and legal initiatives to combat anti-Semitism with a particular focus on the university campuses, on higher education. And so what I took over the Brandeis Center when Ken moved into the administration to head the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. So at the end of July, I took over running the Brandeis Center. And one of the things that's become apparent to me in the last 6 months is that we have not yet succeeded in articulating what is happening on campus as discrimination. When you talk about how what is being celebrated now is identity, the truth is what is happening now on the university campuses is an attack on a key component of Jewish identity. And we have not figured out and have not mastered articulating it in that fashion. So if what happens is you let it be dealt with or handled as just a political dispute, your legal tools are not going to help you. On the other hand, if you articulate it as discrimination and the discrimination that it is, then you can start to use the legal tools and use them effectively. So what do I mean? For example, well, first of all, this feeling for Zion, we have to understand that that didn't start with the modern state of Israel, right? When does the connection between the Jew and the land of Israel begin? It goes back to when God tells Abraham, leave your birthplace and go where I'll show you. And where does he take him? To this land of Israel. And then promises him that his descendants will live in this land. That's when that connection starts. And it grows and grows stronger and continues for thousands of years, right? Not only do you have Moses, who leads, right, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, back to the land, to this promised land, but throughout the diaspora, throughout from the time the Jews are exiled, they pray not only facing Jerusalem, but their prayers are filled with references to the ingathering of the exiles, the yearning for this return to Zion. Right? We say at the Passover Seder every year, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. On Yom Kippur, at the end of Yom Kippur, again, next year in Jerusalem. At a Jewish wedding, it's customary to break a glass. Why? To remember Jerusalem. For 2,000 years, Jews have been praying for rain. Not here, not in California where the wildfires, but there, for rain there in Israel. It's this connection to this land that is an integral part of Jewish identity. My maternal grandmother was born in the old city of Jerusalem when it was under Ottoman rule. She's a sixth-generation Jerusalemite. Her ancestors came to Israel, to that land, to live in Jerusalem in the early 1800s. Not because there was some modern state of Israel there, but because as Jews, they felt that that's where they belonged. That was their home. That is this key component of Jewish identity that is under attack today on university campuses. And we have to start articulating it that way, right? When you have 53 student groups at NYU that decide they're not only going to sign a BDS resolution to boycott Israel, but they're going to boycott the pro-Israel students on campus, what are they saying? What they're saying, these 53 student groups are saying to the pro-Israel Jewish students on campus, they're saying, you want to join our progressive community here? You want to be able to demonstrate with us on climate change or immigration or women's rights or gay rights? We'll let you into our club, 53 student groups. We'll let you into our club. There's just one price for admission. Give up, check your support for Israel at the door. Shed that part of your Jewish identity, and then we'll accept you. I suggest to you that's no different than if they said to those students, take off your yarmulke, and then you can come in. Stop keeping kosher, and then we'll accept you. That's what's happening on campus today. And that's what we have to start articulating. What is happening? These students are being bullied and demonized and made to feel that it is unsafe for them to express this feeling for Zion. Put aside whether or not you support the current policies. Yes, that kind of discussion and debate you can have on campus. But just feeling a positive feeling for Israel. We have students now that don't want to wear t-shirts with Hebrew on them because they feel they're going to be targets. Students that used to put on their back of the phones stickers or things that were supporting Israel say, why should I bother now? Why should I put myself out there? I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to get bullied. We have presidents of Hillels on campus that have decided they will not articulate what their position is on Israel. Why? Because they can't. Their speech, right? Their pro-Israel speech is being shut down. They are being forced in this time where we celebrate identity to hide that part of their identity, to feel shame about that part of their identity. We shouldn't be tolerating that, right? Now, when I was just now in Israel, I took a group of students there over winter break. We met with a Muslim, an Israeli Arab Muslim, a woman who wore a hijab. She told me about told the whole group about how she studied at the University of Tel Aviv. And she said to them, she said to the students, I had a friend who came with me. She was also a devout Muslim. My Hebrew wasn't very good, she said. This is the woman who's talking. She said, so I decided to study on the foreigners program in English. But my friend wanted to really fit in with the Israelis. So she took off her hijab, she practiced her Hebrew, and she really blended in, and she went to Tel Aviv University, blending in with everyone else. Now I ask you, does the Muslim woman who took off her hijab to study at Tel Aviv University have any right to demand of the Muslim woman who decided to keep her hijab on that she has to remove her hijab? Then why should students who've decided to shed the part of their identity that is this yearning for Zion have any right to demand of Jewish students that maintain that part of their identity, that they have to shed that? In the questions, I'll be happy to go through more of how I've dealt with UCLA and other universities to explain this to them and to try and address this issue further.
Something you're presenting to the Supreme Court. But seriously, you know, whoa.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ron. And thank you, Alyza. So let's. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we will open it up for folks in the room to ask questions. We have, I think, plenty of time. So let me just start by saying to the three of you, what should be the if you were a college administrator and you were coming into a campus anew, what would kind of be the first few steps you would take to make sure that the campus is in the right place? Either for a crisis that might come or for something that's festering. Is there, Geri, you're nodding the most voraciously, so.
Okay, now should I stand up too? Okay, hi. So what I would say, and this goes back to part of what I was discussing, it seems to me that there is a reluctance, and this goes in part to what Alyza was talking about as well. There's a reluctance to embrace in an explicit manner anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic forms of Zionism as part of what the university addresses when it comes to racism or bigotry in other contexts. So I think one of the first things is that in the initial meeting with whatever the new administrator is by your community, and that's another part, our communities, our donors, our trustees, our parents, you know, whoever is relevant in the context should be meeting with administrators and making sure that if it's not explicitly in the code of conduct, then it is seen as an intimate part of what people get trained on, educated on an annual basis, and this includes student leaders, so that there is a framework within which people understand what the appropriate behavior is. Because right now, behavior is all over the place, and it's almost like it's a chaos in which all bets are off. And so if you can get the administration to set the stage appropriately, then people know what they're held accountable for. So I think that that is, you know, if I were a new administrator coming in, convening those groups would be useful. Okay, I think secondarily, and this goes to the other points, is that there does have to be a code of conduct with respect to what violates and what's disciplined and what's inappropriate. Recognizing that free speech has to be protected, academic freedom has to be protected, but there are limits. There is a balancing test. And trying to get these people to come to grips with what that is very important.
I'll just add some technical pieces. I think what we're seeing with universities right now is an issue with the bias reporting forms. If any of you are familiar with them, none of them are explicitly have anti-Semitism as like a checkbox. Whether or not they do, our part of our role in advocacy is, one, advocating to the students that they need to report the issues that they're seeing on their campus, because that's how the campus will actually be able to measure what's happening and be responsive to it. We need both sides, our advocacy and the university's own reporting mechanisms to understand what is actually happening. And then we need to be explicit about naming anti-Semitism for what it is. I think many of us have experienced campuses that are trying to deal with a swastika that might have been drawn on the side of a building, or another anti-Semitic incident that is only recognized as bigotry or discrimination, but not called out for anti-Semitism. And that's part of what we need to do when we ask administrations to recognize what has happened, to use their freedom of speech to denounce those things that are happening. They need to be explicit about what it actually is. It needs to include some historical facts so that the students can learn. They are educational moments, and we need to ask and demand from the universities that they use them as such.
So I'm just going to tell you about a conversation I had with some administrators at UCLA 3 days before the National Students for Justice in Palestine conference. I was there in California. And I met with about several of the vice chancellors and dean of students. And I explained to them what I just explained to you about this attack on Jewish identity. And then I read to them from the National SJP conference website, where they talked about what their goals for the conference were going to be. And their second goal, they called Regearing from Mythos to Action. And they said the aim of this theme is to remind us that Zionism is not an insurmountable force. We know that Zionism is ethnic cleansing, destruction, mass expulsion, apartheid, and death. But it is also something very tangible. The reason we can have hope is that Zionism is a human ideology and a set of laws that have been challenged and can be destroyed. This is a reminder that the successful challenges to Zionism have come from direct action. We need to work on reframing Zionism not as some age-old force that's too great to confront, but as actual laws and institutions that can be broken down and dismantled. And listen to this. At this conference, we will continue to make space for theorizing ideologies, but we'll also focus on developing actionable, local, and regional campaigns with clear targets. So I said to the university administrators, I get it, right? I totally believe in protecting free speech, and we are not about, and the Brandeis Center is not about shutting down anyone's speech. I said, what is the difference if you have real hateful rhetoric that takes place in the public square versus if it takes place on your university campus. I said, what you have just done now is you've allowed this to take place, or you're about to allow this, to take place on your campus. When they say here that they will make space for theorizing, but they also want to make sure to focus on developing actionable local and regional campaigns with clear targets. I said, if you're talking about a group that's made clear now that they want to destroy and dismantle Zionism, and they're a student group, and they want to have clear targets, so who are their targets? Their targets have to be the pro-Israel Zionist students on campus. And what are their actionable and regional campaigns going to look like? They'll look like what you saw at NYU, right, where they boycott the pro-Israel students and demonize them so that they can't express that part of their identity. Or it looks like what happened at UCLA in May when they had one of these egregious event disruptions where they came into an event on indigenous people and started for 8 minutes chanting things like, we don't want no 2 states, we want 48, meaning we don't want to compromise, we want 1948 before there even was a state of Israel. Right? We want no pro-Israel speech on this campus. So I said to the university administrators, what's your obligation? There's a difference, right? If you were to have a march that went down Main Street, the government doesn't have any kind of obligation, legal obligation, to comment on the nature of that speech, no matter how racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic it may be. On the other hand, if you let that speech onto your campus, you have a legal obligation under Title VI to make sure and protect against a hostile environment. Now what does that mean? I'll grant you, under the law, that standard is ambiguous. But at a minimum, what it means is you have to recognize this speech as the anti-Semitic speech that it is, as the hate speech that it is. You should condemn it, I said to them, and I think you have the obligation to reach out to the targets of that speech. And the targets of that speech are not just Jews. The targets of that speech are the Zionist pro-Israel students on campus. Those are the ones who are being targeted. So they said to me, well, we wrote, our chancellor wrote an op-ed. I said, your op-ed was very nice, but your op-ed, while it condemned the speech, made it sound as if this group wants to sit down and dialogue with me. Mm-hmm. It talked about how we have to make spaces for groups to and understand that they need to hear things with which they may disagree and that may make them uncomfortable. I said, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to make space for the kind of dialogue on campus to be able to discuss and have robust discussion on the issues. But this group's not looking to dialogue. This group said they want to destroy and dismantle Zionism. They want to destroy a key component of my identity. And at that point, one of the vice chancellors looked at me and he said, I get it. It's as if I'm asking an African American to sit down and dialogue with a member of the KKK. Okay, that is it. So what do I think is the university's obligation? I think the universities have to be made to understand this kind of attack. And I do, while I support the definition of anti-Semitism, I think that there's a much simpler line that is easier for people to understand as to how do you determine what kind of criticism is anti-Semitism and what is not. I think what's key is that you have to look at the entity or the individual where that criticism is coming from. And there's one key question that you have to ask, and that is, does the entity or the individual that is criticizing Israel support the right of self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland? That's the question. Because if you support the right of self-determination for the Palestinians, or for blacks in South Africa, or for the Kurds, or for any other group, but not for Jews, then your problem is with Jews. And that's anti-Semitism. Why are you pushing for self-determination for the Palestinians, but not for the Jews? If you support self-determination for the Jewish people somewhere in their ancestral homeland, if you believe there should be a Jewish state of Israel in some borders, then okay, then what we're debating are borders, settlements, rabbinical courts, whatever it is. That's what you see going on in Israel all the time, right? Disputes and disagreements about the policies of the government of Israel. But if you don't support the right of self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, if you don't think there should be a Jewish state anywhere in those borders, then your criticism is not meant to reform the policies of the government of Israel, no matter how much you want to mask it and make it sound as if it's human rights and that's what you want. Your criticism is really to destroy the state of Israel. And that's anti-Semitic.
Secondly, and we'll start with you, Emily, what should we be doing as a community to support students dealing with these issues on campus?
Look, I think there's multiple levels of things that we can do to help support students. Your local Hillels are there 100% of the time. Supporting them is supporting students. They need to know what resources are available in the community. You should be meeting with the Hillel directors regularly to talk about relationships that you hold that maybe they don't, support that you can help them get, so that that support can be translated to the students in whatever capacity that means, whether that's a conversation with an administrator, with a trustee, with a joint donor. Those are the kinds of conversations we have to be having. There are lots of programs going on pairing Jewish students with mentors in the community. Lots of different Hillels are trying to start those. If you have people who want to be actively involved, who are looking for engagement with your CRC, with your federation, but want to do it in a toughless, meaningful way, especially with college students, that I think is incredibly relevant. Just having those conversations is so important. Taking them on trips with students. We do advocacy trips to Washington, D.C. to lobby on a whole host of issues related to the Jewish community. Take students with you. If you're coming to the Hill, bring them with you, have them speak to the members of Congress that you're advocating with, or with your state officials, your city officials, whatever that means. That kind of leadership development and programmatic work is fundamental to them learning and being involved and feeling a real connection to their Jewish community and like a valued member of their Jewish community. And they feel much less guilt when that happens. They feel much closer to the adults. They feel like they have a voice. And that's where the isolation that's happening on campus today, their feelings of guilt, and they're wanting to just have the normal, regular college experience without having to be a fighter for Israel, and using that kind of military language that they abhor, because to me it's wrong. They are not soldiers for Israel. They are Jews who care for Zion, who have that deep connection, where Israel is a part of their Jewish identity. They are not soldiers for Israel, nor are they boots on the ground. But we have to approach them as the adults that they are. The educational component, incredibly important. We know students are coming to campus today ill-equipped to talk about Israel. Some are having trouble finding it on a map. Others are having trouble talking about the population in Israel. They don't know what's happening, what the news of the day in Israel is, and they're feeling ill-equipped for that. There are tons of opportunities for training sessions to happen. You as CRC professionals are seeing the intersection of the civil issues that are happening with anti-Semitism, with Jewish issues, with religious interfaith issues across the city. That relevancy is so important to college students today. You can bring real depth of understanding and knowledge to them just as professionals doing your role.
Geri or Alyza? So let me, we're going to open up for questions in a minute, but let me dive, Alyza, into your Jewish identity take. And let me just start off the discussion. So Zionism is how old? 100 and some years old? What year are we, 2019? 150 years old? How many years?
122 years old, 1897.
108, there you go. Going to August 31st, 1897, the first Zionist conference. Well done. So I can see that where Zionism could be a part of our Jewish identity today, and God willing is for everybody in this room, but when you're going back to Abraham, when you're going back 2,000 years, it's not this sort of political Zionism. Can you sort of walk us through how you get this sort of generic connection next year in Jerusalem to political Zionism and how that sort of equates as one in the way that you're putting this view together?
So I think,
And feel free to stand up.
I don't think that Zionism has to be. I mean, I think that's part of the problem. I think one of the difficulties that we see now today on campus is that expressions of faith across the board have been politicized. Like the Christian community sees this. Their positions on issues that grew out of sincere faith-based reactions are now, they can't express them without them being viewed as political positions. And what's happening now with this yearning for Zion, right, I heard, so at the Israeli American Council conference, Miriam Peretz, who won the Israel Prize last year, spoke. So she's an author, she's a writer. She talked about her experience. She was born in Morocco. And she said that when she was a child, her father used to talk to them about Jerusalem and used to tell them how there were trees in Jerusalem that gave milk and honey. And when he used to see the word Jerusalem on the paper, he would kiss the letters on the page, so much so. And then he came one day and he said to them, he said, the Messiah has come. We're going to Jerusalem. And she said, Daddy, what does the Messiah look like? And he said he wears jeans and a t-shirt and sandalim. It was the Israeli shaliach, right, who was bringing them to Israel. But then she went, and her personal story is very painful because she came, and ultimately her oldest son was killed in the war in Lebanon, and her husband died a year later, and her younger son was killed in the war in Gaza. But she talks about how she's a gingy, she's a redhead, she'll go on, she'll persevere. And yet, when I talked to her after this speech, and she said to me, Alyza, she said, one of the problems that I fear is that our next generation is no longer yearning for Jerusalem. This yearning that kept Jews together for centuries, literally for centuries, and that's why I talk about my grandmother, right? That is the part, that's the Zionism, not the political Zionism. We don't have to politicize it all the time. That is the yearning for Zion that's in the prayers, that was felt by Jews around the globe, like Miriam Peretz's father, that we're losing. And for those who still have it, they are being pressured and bullied to shed it.
Can I just add? I am not a Supreme Court lawyer, nor as eloquent as Alyza. To put a point on it, the issue is an understanding and depth of understanding of peoplehood. If you ask Jewish students today, that concept of peoplehood isn't one that they inherently feel, that maybe their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents felt. There's that poem by, I think, Yehuda Amichai that I can't remember. I'm going to butcher it, but when a Jew pricks himself with something sharp, we don't ask how does it feel, we ask how does it remember like. And that feeling, that understanding, that sort of visceral piece, which Alyza so eloquently talks about, is what is missing. That peoplehood element, they don't understand. They grew up in what is ultimately a post-border world. You can get anywhere, do anything, talk to anyone, and they don't understand the construct of peoplehood or more fundamentally tribalism, and what it means to be that deeply connected to somebody halfway across the world, who is also a Jew, who is connected to you in that visceral way.
Okay, let's move the questions. And Neil, tell us who you are and where you're from, and speak loudly.
Well, that I can do. So,
Yeah, we know that.
I'm Rabbi Neil Borvis. I'm a retired rabbi living in New York City, and I'm a vice chair of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. And I've been going to Israel since 1968, since I was a junior in college. I think that there was a mixture that bothers me. I'd love to have explained a little more. I understand the yearning for Zion. I'll tell you that I think that Zionism actually, I said 1897, I really believe it happened on the 10th of Av in the year 70, the day after the destruction of the temple. But that's not where most of the kids who grew up in my synagogue or were at my Hillel in Texas in the 70s felt. And I think that we have to recognize that there's two different battlegrounds. One is, how do we help fourth, fifth, sixth generation American Jews have that identity? And I think that, and we have to separate that from the issue of rights. And part of the issue for my kids' generation of American Jews, for millennials today, and for college students even more so, is that they see things that we thought of as issues as basic human rights. And I think that recognizing that the right of the Jewish state, of Jews to have our state, as well as the right of other people, national self-determination, is an important point. And I think that we need to argue with the administration and support student groups to say that they have a legitimate right, and that we as Jews have as much a right as Asian Americans, as Indian Americans, as African Americans, to our own identity and our connection to our people beyond America. And I think I felt there was a mixing of those two issues, and I think that gets complex and dangerous.
Thank you, Neil. Anybody want to?
Well, so Neil, let me just say a couple of things. I mean, I think that what we do in Jewish education and how you treat generations of students and certainly the contemporary group of people is a responsibility of the Jewish community, not of the university.
Right.
Okay? So if what we're trying to contextualize here for purposes of our action, because we have to deal with the university community today, the part I think of what you're saying, and it's touched on by everybody else here, is that there was a moment in time where people understood that anti-Semitism was a form of racism and bigotry, right? I mean, in a post-Holocaust world, certainly, if not everybody, there was a common understanding that this is what we fought against in World War II. Because of the joining of sort of the anti-Semitism along with the anti-Semitic forms of anti-Zionism, is that you have kind of a mush that people, you know, to use a technical term, that people in university administrations find hard to tackle. So again, to use the Rutgers example, you know, I feel like I've been meeting with the president of Rutgers for the last year and a half, right? And the president and the general counsel and everybody who's in charge, they all say, we don't want a cafeteria plan, right? We want to just say racism and bigotry, and if we say anti-Semitism, they have to say Islamophobia, we have to say anti-this and anti-that, and it's too fragmented and we can't do it, and we have to put everything under one heading. Well, the problem with that, and this kind of goes here, is that if people aren't, you know, people might be sensitized to the N-word, okay? But people are no longer sensitized to what it means to be anti-Semitic in the contemporary context. And so we have to convince universities and college administrators that they have an obligation in recognizing this is an identity and a religion too, and the only way that we're going to address this is if you have educated administrators, faculty, staff, and this includes law enforcement also, but also that student leaders have to understand what the parameters of debate are. And unless you get that, you're not going to have a context within which to deal with it on campus. That doesn't relieve us of the responsibility as a community to educate our children, right? That's a really different issue. And I think part of what happens on Hillel's on campus, and Emily knows because she deals with this all the time, is that one of the tensions that Hillel International keeps struggling with is if we're the center for Jewish life on campus, we aren't also the ground troops of a war against Israel. And that not every student who walks into the Hillel wants to be at war. And also there are, let's face it, J Street, JVP, if not now kids who would like to belong to Hillel, and because of the Israel issue, you've got a struggle going on. So we've got, it's not like there's one struggle, But I do think we have to think about, again, what we can do as a community, as the adults in the community that support the students. The Jewish community is filled with university donors. It's filled with university trustees. We need to map our community, and sometimes the people who live in New Jersey are alumni of, you know, the University of Michigan. We need to know our communities and we need to know our assets. And one thing that the Michigan community will tell you after this whole drama around the references for students to study in Israel is that the Jewish donors, the University of Michigan, were quite organized and you know, thanks to the Chicago Federation, huh? Right, they had you know, and you have a lot of Jewish presidents of universities, and they can set the stage. They can create models that we can take to other universities. It may not be cookie cutter, but the more wins we get on the board, and we can say to people that this works, it's, you know, it's what we do. It's creating best practices that we can move forward on together.
Thank you, that really clarified things that I...
Thank you, Neil. We have time, we have 3 more minutes. Let me go, yes. Please tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Magda Shaler-Haynes. I'm from Metro West, New Jersey, and have not been involved in the reference issue at all, but would be happy to. 2 things. First, I am both a Columbia alum and a Columbia adjunct faculty member for 10 years. And in that time, Columbia has become a hotbed of a lot of activity. I am both at the law school and at the School of Public Health, but not directly involved in anything having to do with Judaism or Israel. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who are Jewish and said, hey, do you know, like, this is a cesspool for our Jewish students, our undergrad students? And everyone says, huh, what can I do about that? So I think there's room to engage faculty who are not in Judaic studies programs. I've looked to invite Israeli guest speakers to my class as, you know, just guest visitors or whatever. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. That's one suggestion. And then in terms of the comment that was made, I don't see a separation between the rights-based discourse and Hearts and Minds campaign. I think both have to happen simultaneously. And the model that I look at in my full-time work, not adjunct work, is the NRA that played a 40-year-long game jurisprudentially in legal academia and in the courts, established the Second Amendment doctrine that it wanted to see effectuated, built the Hearts and Minds campaign, and this is why we're in the situation we're in right now with respect to gun rights. But I think the long game is played over decades, and you know, Alyza, the First Amendment doctrine that you're talking about needs to, it's fantastic, and it needs to be more robust. And I think that the investments need to be made both in the courts and also in legal academia, because the training has to occur to say the messages that we need to hear in order to have a doctrinal root to attach what Geri's trying to do when she meets with the administrations, and both things need to happen simultaneously. So thank you for your work. I don't know if there are other models that you would look at that of success in your view.
Any thoughts?
No, I like that. I will add just one other thing that the Brandeis Center has done is we've now started a program, we call it Jigsaw. It's our Justice Initiative guiding student activists worldwide. We have law student chapters, and we are teaching our law students, we're now teaching law students the areas of law that you specifically need to understand to effectively combat the anti-Semitism on campus, to understand the First Amendment issues, the discrimination issues, the university, when you talk about the bias complaint systems, the university policies, the criminal law, because the event disruptions are governed by criminal law statutes in pretty much every country, every state. And then allow the law students to partner with and mentor and work with the undergraduates, because most of this activity is taking place not in the law schools, but in the undergraduate campuses. And the law students aren't reaching out to lawyers, but having students partner with students, students helping students. That way, when it comes to filing bias complaints or actually trying to figure out how do you articulate the narrative so that the university starts to understand this message, having the students be able to do that with the help and the guidance of the law students, something that we're working on to try to make this great.
So we heard from Geri responding to the first question, Alyza responding to the second question. So now the last word will come from Emily, and then we're going to go to break. And then if you want to have more discussion, you can come back here and hear the whole thing again. Emily.
It's really a request. I think we've seen the unbelievable boost in support from community members as Our Community Relations Council has gotten involved in things that are going on campus. Many of you know Dan Goldwyn, he's exceptional, he just started, fantastic. The relevancy that many of our federations and CRCs are looking for the next generation is now happening on campus. This conversation is what will ensure that the next generation of students can be involved and understand how they can have voices in their community through you, through our organizations, through how we're organized as a Jewish community. Get involved, talk to them, work with your Hillel professionals and other Jewish professionals on campuses near you. It's important and they need your support.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our panel, and thank you all for engaging on these important issues. And there's a break in the hallway, and then we reconvene at 3:45, 30 minutes, 3 seconds down.